Well, performance testing is getting less fun by the day in 2021. I'm adding some thoughts to the recent news broken by Anandtech on the OnePlus 9s. It's a great technical read, digging into the nooks and crannies of what's a pretty bad strategy from OnePlus, and I've got that article linked in the description below. The TLDR: in past years, manufacturers would game benchmarks by including a higher performance mode that consumers couldn't really use. The phone would see a benchmark app and then it would light up extra horsepower to get a better score. A benchmark performance whitelist, if you will. What OnePlus is doing now is the opposite of that. The phone runs normally when using a benchmark or a less common app, but the phone keeps a list of popular services that can be shuffled off to lower power CPU cores. Web browsers, social media apps, mapping, messaging. Those apps won't use the highest performing parts of the CPU. It's a performance blacklist, if you will. When the news broke, we saw Geekbench delist the OnePlus 9s from its rankings, and if you count on Geekbench scores to predict real-world performance, that's not what you'll see using a OnePlus. The big score from Geekbench won't be the reality of using many popular services on the smaller, low-power CPU cores. And I think we can all agree that's a pretty bad look for OnePlus. I mean, you're going to have to pardon a little rambling here. I'm not recording off of a proper script. I'm just looking at some notes. So go with me on this for just a second. Performance testing this year has already been hard enough for the premium SoCs we got from Qualcomm and Samsung. The Snapdragon 888 is complicated, and every manufacturer using it has had to employ some tactic for balancing performance consistency, and heat. We're starting to close in on almost laptop grade power draw, and we still expect these pocket computers to fit in our pockets. This is where I have to admit my current method of testing has a small blind spot, because I made an assumption. My feeling is, as phones climb into Chromebook and laptop prices, they should be able to tackle some Chromebook or laptop use. And I genuinely do use them like that. A good number of my videos are at least partially edited from my phones. And I do almost all of my podcast mixdowns from my phones. Seriously, this phone can chew up MP3s faster than my desktop workstation can. Raw photo editing, almost all of my documents, invoices, and contracts handled through my phones. I get real cranky when I need to turn to another computer to do something and I can't do it in some way from a phone. But I digress. My assumption for performance testing, I focus on laptop grade use. I figure if we can demonstrate improvements to performance in areas like living out at the extremes of how you might use a phone, we should easily be able to take the social media and messaging stuff for granted. I run really hard, sustained tests. I thought that would cover my bases for Instagram. And apparently, OnePlus has proven that incorrect. When I started building my lists of tests, I wanted to avoid the dumb trend of app launching speedruns, because that tells you nothing about a phone's performance. And I also avoid anything that uses a data connection as the primary aspect of that app, because it's impossible to make that a consistent factor from phone to phone to phone when the phone is pulling data from a remote server. I run a heavy lifting application like video rendering. I can time from phone to phone which phones perform that task the fastest. And that list has grown to include audio mixing, batch photo editing, and file compression. I can start those apps, start a stopwatch, and literally time how long the completion of that task takes. So I really don't know how to test the performance of a social media app. What am I supposed to time? What can I measure? What's a factor of local phone performance, and what part of the app is dependent on the time it takes to talk to that server and get the information back? Because That's the weirdness for the OnePlus 9s. The OnePlus Performance Blacklist does not affect any of my heavy lifting tests. You buy an expensive phone and you want to use it for some heavier computing than just basic average consumer smartphoning, the OnePlus 9 is still one of the fastest phones you can buy today. I reran some of my tests yesterday and the scores are still outpacing the S21 in almost all of my tests. But if you go to check your email, that email app is going to open on the low power cores, and it'll probably take a little longer than if you were using the high performance guts. It looks kind of like this. The big sin here is doing this on the down low. OnePlus tried to sneak it by us, and we already have a complicated history of OnePlus playing with benchmarks. Samsung does something very similar with the S21. There's an enhanced mode in the battery settings. Out of the box, that mode is deactivated. So in essence, it's a CPU throttle out of the box. And in many CPU-bound tasks, an S21 performs roughly the same as an S10. It drops you pretty consistently almost 2 generations down. And there's almost no conveyance to the consumer that this is the situation. On the back of all of that marketing, everyday epic, you could still probably just be rocking an S10 for a very similar overall daily driver experience. On my S21 videos, I have all the Samsung stands telling me that this is the right thing to do. Who really needs all that power? My phone never lags, blah, blah, blah. So I'm sure all those folks are going to be exceedingly fair for OnePlus in the same way, right? Do you need the battery draining cores to kick on to check your text messages? Really? But that's the critical difference. You can flip the switch on an S21, and you can't on a OnePlus. You can't deactivate their blacklist, and that's where I'm frustrated, where I'm mad about Samsung hiding high performance options while advertising everyday epic, and now where I'm mad about OnePlus, because they should just tell the consumer up front. You will face no backlash from your customers. You can have high performance when you want it, and way better battery when you need it. No one's going to be upset about that. It's not that complicated. Make it a unique splash screen at setup. 2 big buttons. You put little flames on the high performance mode and a green leaf on the battery mode. Everyone's going to understand that. But snarky tone aside, you got to tell people. And you got to make it clear. I'm kind of getting to the end of my notes here, but this further reinforces my belief that we need better metrics for performance testing instead of always just leaning on synthetic benchmarks. Okay, if anyone at Geekbench happens to catch this, your test is no longer a good predictor of real-world performance. Not anymore. Mobile SoCs are now really good at getting big scores from your test, but those scores don't much relate to someone sitting down and using an app for a bit, or sitting down and playing a game for a while. If you're into tech, you need to dig a step deeper. And we can always start by looking at what Geekbench really does. You push go and a slider runs across your screen, and then you get these big number scores. But then you scroll down and you see lists of tiny little tests that were performed to generate those aggregated scores. No one uses their phone by bursting rapidly through dozens of services and using them for maybe a second or 3 before moving on to a different service. The big CPU cores on the Exynos 2100 and Snapdragon 888 are really good at spiking fast performance for very brief periods of time. And I find it telling that almost every Android manufacturer this year is engaging in some form of CPU throttling for more mainstream use. Samsung, Xiaomi, OnePlus, they don't need to game Geekbench with a higher performance mode, a sneaky whitelist. The SoCs are already built to maximize those scores. Phone manufacturers seem to be struggling this year with how to keep the devices from running too hot and draining the battery too fast. And just as another brief tangent, as I'm going farther and farther off my notes here, I'm already preparing for the reviewers ready to pan a future Google Pixel if Google uses their own custom SoC. Like if the Pixel 6 is a premium priced phone, but scores 15% lower in Geekbench. Oh, the wailing, the travesty, the gnashing of teeth. Yet most Galaxy S21 owners, and I guess all OnePlus owners, are already dealing with CPU performance way lower than that in daily driver use. Again, all the techies who whined so hard about the poor performance on the Pixel 4, but when it came to chewing up photo and video data, the Pixel 4 can still outperform a number of modern flagships. But the Geekbench score. I guess you only use your phone for Geekbench, I guess. Okay, for reals, wrapping this all up, I'd highly recommend checking out the write-up on Anandtech. It's the proper technical breakdown. They show all their work covering all the stuff that I'm kind of oversimplifying in this editorial. But as a suggestion to the editors there at Anandtech, it's definitely more work. But I'd love to see you add to your phone reviews and benchmarks. Instead of only using synthetic tests, incorporate some real-world applications to compare to, just like you do for your desktop CPU tests. We don't just use synthetic tests to explain laptop and desktop performance, because it's kind of shocking to see how often that real-world performance does not line up with the synthetic score. And the parting shot, I mean, just getting this back to the main topic of the video, OnePlus, if you're listening, just give us the option. If we've learned anything this year, and especially considering that you do not make the chip that goes into this phone, it's a really good time to start looking at advanced power and battery management options. Just give me the button that I can control it myself. Because you've got all the fast stuff. This phone can be a screamer. We just need a better handle on all the slow stuff now. And yeah, that's it. I think we can put a pin in this video. Again, this is like my third video talking specifically about the performance of phones, and just it's been a bit of a headache. It's just a bummer because shopping at the premium tier should be fun. It should be exciting. We shouldn't be fearful or doubtful of what we're investing in. Living at the bleeding edge of features and power. And 2021 is sucking quite a bit of fun out of that conversation. As always, thanks so much for watching, sharing. Sharing is huge, subscribing. Even if this one was kind of a downer, I definitely appreciate the conversation we're going to have underneath this video, and I'll catch you all on the next one.